Welcome to Football with Cheese. Today's video is going to be about free agency, what you should do, what you most definitely not do. So make sure you are subscribed and turn on the notification bell because we got a lot of videos coming. Anything crazy happens, signing, trade, I might do an instant reaction. Before we get into free agency, we know that Myles Garrett requested a trade about a month ago from the Browns. Browns came out and said we're not trading him. And then Garrett wanted to meet with Browns owner Jimmy Haslam, which means he'd skip the GM, Andrew Berry, go right to the source, the owner. And what my guess is that Garrett was going to lay out all the reasons why you should trade me and probably threaten to hold out if you don't. And what Haslam did, which is a really good sales tactic, can be, is refuse to meet with him. Say, I'm not meeting with Myles Garrett. He's a Brown. He's under contract. I'm not going to meet with him. And it worked because Myles Garrett signed an extension with the Browns. The Browns did have to pay him. They probably had to pay him more than they would have liked to keep him. But you're not going to get value for a player that good. And it worked. And people were criticizing Jimmy Haslam. How dare you not meet with him? He doesn't have to meet with him. It was a good move. He doesn't owe him anything. He's paying him a lot of money. So good move by Browns owner Jimmy Haslam. Myles Garrett is back. Let's talk free agency. What is free agency? Free agency is about filling needs on your roster. If you have salary cap room, obviously. You cannot do it if you don't have the salary cap room. So it's all about filling needs, going after a certain player at a certain position. Ideally, you do not want to use free agency at all. You don't want to have to. If you draft year in, year out, and you re-sign your players before they even hit the market, then you don't need free agency. Maybe just for a player here or there. Maybe you need some depth at like tight end and the draft's weak at tight end, hypothetically. So you don't want to have to use it, but it's a tool you can use if you have the cap room and if you need a player at a certain position. So let's talk about good free agencies and bad free agencies, and we can use last year. Brian Gutekunst, the Green Bay Packers, had a good free agency. After the playoff loss to the 49ers, they lost 24-21, a very close game. Packers led most of the game. There was an obvious need at free safety. Now, I knew that for years, but in that game, Darnell Savage blew the two biggest plays. It was a George Kittle touchdown and a long run by Christian McCaffrey. Any average safety, not even a good one, could have made those plays. And Green Bay very likely wins, and they go on to the NFC title game, and who knows, maybe go on to the Super Bowl. You never know. But Darnell Savage was a huge liability at safety. So what did Green Bay do? They went out and they signed Xavier McKinney to fill that position. The Giants somehow did not franchise Xavier McKinney, and they didn't match Green Bay's offer. More on that in a second. Xavier McKinney is definitely a top 10 safety in the league, probably top 5. He's that good. He's a very good safety. And that filled a huge need. And because Green Bay had a salary cap room, mainly because they traded Rodgers, his contract came off the books. Because they had all that salary cap room, they were able to sign him. The rumor was he might get 13, 14 million per year. They gave him 17 million a year. So more than people thought. But you know what? They had the cap room. He's a great player, and it really worked out. They also signed Josh Jacobs to a 4-year, $48 million deal. Aaron Jones is a great player, but he was not playing all 17 games. He was missing time. He would play maybe half the season. And Green Bay asked him to take a pay cut. They weren't able to come to an agreement. They ended up releasing Jones. So they signed Josh Jacobs, who's younger, 4 years younger, and is more durable. Josh Jacobs is durable. He just does not miss games. And Josh Jacobs had a monster year. So what Green Bay did, because they had the cap space, they targeted two positions of need. And they signed not good players, elite players at the position. That's what you do. You don't sign average talent. You don't sign below average talent, just pay them just to use cap space. You go after specific players at specific positions of weakness. And he did a masterful job And you can argue McKinney was their MVP on defense and Jacobs was their MVP on offense. That's how good they did. Here's what you don't do. Giants GM Joe Schoen did not have a good offseason. He had a good draft, but he had a terrible offseason. He let Xavier McKinney walk for nothing. He did not franchise him. And he let Saquon Barkley walk. He didn't want to pay him $13 million a year. He didn't want to match Packers $17 million a year for Xavier McKinney. And it really turned out bad for him because both those players had amazing seasons. Here's who Joe Schoen did sign. He signed Devin Singletary, running back. He gave him $5.5 million a year. Devin Singletary, he's been an okay player in the league. He's had some decent years for the Bills. Came from the Texans. But he didn't make much of an impact. In fact, their 5th-round pick, Tyrone Tracy, running back from Purdue, was better than Singletary. So you're paying a guy $5.5 million a year, and you replaced him with someone better in the 5th round. You do not want to sign free agents, pay them a bunch of money that takes up cap space, and then find a player at that position in the middle rounds that's better. Because Tyrone Tracy signed a 4-year, $4.3 million deal. He makes about $1 million a year. That's cheap. Draft picks are cheap. You hit on draft picks, it can save you so much cap room. He also, Joe Schoen, signed John Runyon Jr., a guard, to a $10 million a year contract. He came from Green Bay. I know him well. John Runyon is above average pass blocker, below average run blocker. He's an average player. So it's $10 million plus $5.5 million. It's $15.5 million spent on Devin Singletary and John Runyon. You could have had Saquon for less than that. You could have almost had Xavier McKinney. So makes absolutely no sense. John Runyon was originally a 6th-round pick. There were mid-round guards in this past draft that are better than John Runyon, had better seasons. Dominic Pooney, 3rd-round pick of the 49ers. He was much better than John Runyon this past season. He was a 3rd-round pick. Way cheaper. So that's what you don't do in free agency, what Joe Schoen did. Sign guys that are replacement level, or you can find a 3rd, 4th, 5th-round pick that's as good or better. Brian Gutekunst of the Packers targeted specific players who are some of the best at their position. And Joe Schoen spent money on average players that aren't as good as 3rd, 4th, 5th-round picks. So that's free agency. There's one other way you can win free agency, like what Washington did. Both the Bears and the Redskins, they're not the Commanders, they're the Redskins. Both the Bears and Redskins had holes in their roster going into last year. Both signed a bunch of veterans because they had the cap space. Not necessarily great players, but they needed to plug a bunch of holes in the roster. It worked out for Washington. Washington didn't just target veterans that were good or above average. They targeted people that knew the system, knew Dan Quinn's system, their new coach, and leaders. They targeted guys with strong leadership, and it worked. They made the NFC title game. The Bears signed a lot of veterans too, or traded for them. Keenan Allen didn't really work out. A lot of them didn't really work out. They didn't have the same effect. But I get why both teams had that strategy. We got to fill some holes. We have the cap room, and we need some veteran leadership. That's what the Redskins did. So that's the other way. And then Jacksonville Jaguars, we'll mention them. They're notorious for making some of the worst free agent signings. And last year, they signed Darnell Savage, who we just talked about. 3 years, $21 million from Green Bay. He was terrible this past year for Jacksonville. And they signed Gabe Davis, wide receiver from the Bills. They give him $13 million a year. So Gabe Davis makes more money than Saquon Barkley. Gabe Davis, replacement level player. You can find a receiver in the mid rounds better than Gabe Davis. So what Washington did, what Green Bay did, that's how you win free agency. That's how you approach it. What the Jaguars did and the Giants did, that's what you don't do in free agency. And those teams stunk. Let's be honest. Those teams stunk and their rosters aren't very good. So that's free agency. Comment down below. What do you think? Is there another team that's really good or really bad at free agency? Let me know in the comments. Any player you think you want on your team that's available. Turn the bell for notifications. Like I said, I could go instant reaction anytime. Anything big happens, I'm off of work. It's going to be a fun few days. Probably do 2 or 3 videos a day. You never know. Maybe 4 or 5. We'll see. If you have not checked out these videos, okay, share them with anyone who loves football. Tell them to subscribe so we can grow the channel. And I will see you in free agency.